I'm Jocelyn, 35, a single mom scraping by in a small house by the Gulf Coast in Florida, before I unravel how one calculated letter set my family ablaze and forced me to vanish with my kids under cover of night. Let me share how it all started, a single text that flipped my world upside down. It was a quiet evening, just me and my kids, an 8-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son, sprawled on the living room floor, lost in their games. My phone pinged, my sister's name flashing. That old gut twist warned me to ignore it, but I didn't. The message cut sharp. Hey ATM, send me all your money or don't show up for Thanksgiving. No warmth, no care for my kids, just a cold demand for my bank login. Dressed up as holiday prep, ATM, that's what she'd started calling me, like I was her endless cash machine. I pushed back, offering to send what I could. Her reply bit harder, claiming our mom backed her up, urging me not to complicate things. Then came the line that broke me after years of giving in: no bank access. No Thanksgiving for me or my kids, my children, who'd been planning our beachside picnic with wide-eyed excitement, were now bargaining chips. That's when I drew the line, typing the words that sparked the war. The next morning, a bank alert confirmed the betrayal, $5,000 gone, and as my phone erupted with calls, I knew this was only the start. Before I dive deeper, if family money drama hits home, share your story in the comments and hit subscribe to catch how mine unfolds. That evening was deceptively calm, the kind of quiet that tricks you into thinking the world is steady. I was sprawled on the living room floor of our small house by the Gulf Coast, piecing together a board game with my kids. My 8-year-old daughter, eyes bright with focus, arranged the pieces with precision, while my 5-year-old son, all giggles and chaos, knocked them over with a playful swipe. It was the kind of moment I clung to, a fragile bubble of peace in my life as a single mom grinding through IT support shifts. The faint hum of waves from the nearby bay drifted through the open window, a reminder of the life I built for us, small, manageable, mine. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, a sharp interruption. My sister's name lit up the screen. I should have let it sit. The part of me worn down by years of her demands screamed to ignore it, to stay in that fleeting bubble with my kids. But my thumb betrayed me, swiping the screen open. The message hit like a slap. Hey ATM, send me all your money for Thanksgiving stuff. Need your bank login now. No hello. No mention of my kids, just a blunt grab for my account. The one I shared with my mother for emergencies. ATM. That's what she'd taken to calling me. A cruel jab at my role as the family's endless cash dispenser. My fingers hovered, a familiar knot tightening in my chest. Why I typed, knowing the answer wouldn't justify it. The response came fast, dripping with impatience. She needed it for holiday gifts, she claimed, and didn't have time to transfer her own funds. Just give her access, make it quick. It was always about her convenience, never my security. I could feel the old pattern creeping in, the one where I'd caved to keep the peace. But something in me resisted. I typed back, offering to send money directly, refusing to hand over my login. I wasn't comfortable with it, I said, trying to sound reasonable, like the fixer I'd always been. Her reply was a blade. Don't be difficult. ATM. Mom says it's fine. Just do it. That word, ATM, burned into me. It wasn't just a nickname. It was a declaration that my life, my savings, my kids' future were hers to tap whenever she pleased. My mother's approval was her trump card, a signal that the family's weight was behind her. I stared at the screen, my kids' laughter fading into the background. The world split into her needs and my limits, and for the first time, I saw the line I'd never dared to draw. No, I typed, my fingers steady despite the storm inside. It's my account. For my kids, the answer is no. Her next message was the one that changed everything. Fine, she shot back. No login, no you or your kids at Thanksgiving. The words seared into me. My children, my daughter who'd been sketching out picnic plans for the beach, my son who'd been practicing his sandcastle towers were now pawns in her power play. I looked at them, their small faces lit with innocence, unaware of the battle brewing through my phone. Something snapped, a quiet fracture after years of bending under the weight of family expectations. We're out then, I typed, each word a rebellion against decades of compliance. I hit send, feeling a flicker of defiance, a spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Control. That spark didn't come from nowhere. It was born from a lifetime of being the family's fixer, the one who always stepped up when things broke. Growing up in our Florida home, I was the steady hand, the one who patched things together after my parents' bitter divorce tore us apart. My father, distant since the split, kept his orbit far, sending cards with a few bucks for birthdays. My mother leaned on me instead, her calls constant. A year ago, I spent an hour on the phone walking her through resetting her router. Her voice flustered as she fumbled with cables. My kids were tugging at me, asking for snacks, while I kept my tone patient, explaining the same steps I'd gone over a dozen times before. She'd sigh, saying how my sister was so much better with tech, how it came naturally to her. Of course, I thought, pinching my temples. That sister had a shiny new laptop, one I'd helped cover when my mother's credit card bill came due last Christmas. I was still using a clunky desktop that hummed like a dying engine. Bought secondhand to save money for my kids' future. I was the IT troubleshooter, the bill payer, the one called at midnight when someone's car broke down on the causeway or needed a ride from the airport after a red-eye flight. I learned early, especially after the divorce, that being useful was my ticket to their attention. Be quiet, be reliable, be the one who never says no. My late husband saw through it. One evening, years back, we'd planned a rare date night, just us, a walk along the beach to watch the sunset, but my phone rang. My brother, stranded with a flat tire an hour away. Before I could think, I was grabbing my keys, promising I'd be quick. His eyes, heavy with disappointment, held no anger, just a quiet sadness. They don't do this for you, Jocelyn, he said later, his voice soft but piercing. You're their tool, not their family. His words stuck. A truth I couldn't shake. After his death, the calls for help never stopped. My mother needed me to fix her email. My sister needed cash for some new venture. There was no pause, no space to grieve. My role was cemented, the dependable one, the one who paid, who fixed, who absorbed the chaos so they could keep sailing through theirs. I remember one Christmas when my daughter was barely 3. I paid off a $2,000 credit card bill for my sister. She'd maxed it out on clothes and dinners, her voice tearful over the phone as my mother pleaded for me to help. It's what family does, she said. I was working overtime, saving every penny for my kids, but I wired the money anyway, draining my emergency fund. My sister never mentioned it, never thanked me. She showed up the next week with a new designer bag, calling it a steal. My mother just patted my hand, saying I was a good daughter. Another time, I covered our family's phone plan for months, thinking we'd split it. My mother promised everyone would pitch in, but the check stopped after the first month. My sister always had an excuse: short on cash. Bad month. Next time, when I finally canceled the plan, fed up with footing the bill, they acted like I'd betrayed them. That was the pattern. The unspoken ledger where my sacrifices were entries in their favor. Never mine. My brother stayed out of it. Neutral, offering vague sympathy but no action. He'd call occasionally, checking in, but never deep enough to challenge the dynamic. My job was my refuge, a place where I was more than the family's fixer. As an IT support tech for a local company, I was quick with solutions, calm under pressure. Last month, my boss hinted at a promotion, a lead role with a pay bump that could finally secure my kids' college fund. I hadn't told my family. I wanted to keep that hope close, untainted by their knack for turning my wins into their opportunities. That evening, as I sat with my kids, the weight of my sister's text pressed harder. It wasn't just about money, it was about power, about her belief that my resources were hers to claim. I looked at my daughter, her small hands arranging game pieces, and my son, his grin wide as he toppled them. They were my world, the reason I kept going, the thought of them being used as leverage. Their holiday joy held hostage, lit a fire in me. I wasn't just the ATM anymore. I was their mother, and I'd protect them, no matter the cost. That text wasn't a request, it was a declaration of war. And I'd just fired the first shot. I set the phone down, my heart pounding, but my resolve clear. This wasn't about keeping the peace anymore, it was about drawing a line they couldn't cross. If you've ever felt like a cash machine for your family, give this a like to let me know I'm not alone. The next morning broke quietly, but the calm was a lie. I stood in the kitchen of our small house by the Gulf Coast, pouring cereal for my kids as they chattered about their beach plans for the weekend. My phone, still on the counter from last night's battle, pinged with a bank alert. The sound sliced through the morning haze, sharp and unwelcome. My stomach dropped as I opened the app, fingers trembling over the screen. There it was, stark and undeniable, a transfer of $5,000 from the joint account I shared with my mother, the one meant for my kids' college fund. Every penny I'd scraped together for their future, gone in a single transaction. The air felt thinner, my breath catching as I stared at the numbers, a cold weight settling in my chest. I dialed the bank, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. The customer service rep, her voice smooth with practiced sympathy, confirmed the transfer was initiated by my mother. "It's a joint account, ma'am," she said, her words clinical. "Both parties have full access. Legally, she doesn't need your permission." I pressed her, my voice shaking with a mix of panic and fury, asking if there was any way to reverse it. She paused, then suggested closing the account immediately and consulting a lawyer. "This is a civil matter, not a bank issue," she added, her tone softening but firm. A supervisor echoed the same, his voice heavy with regret but powerless. I hung up, the dial tone buzzing like a wasp in my ear. My mother had reached into my life and taken what wasn't hers, and the bank couldn't or wouldn't stop it. As I set the phone down, it rang again. My father's name flashed on the screen. I answered, bracing myself. He'd always kept his distance since the divorce, a quiet figure who avoided the family's chaos. His voice was low, hesitant, like he was stepping into a minefield. He didn't waste time with small talk. He told me the truth behind the theft, a truth that made the room tilt. My mother had co-signed a loan for my sister, Katrina. 2 years ago, a $50,000 debt for a seafood restaurant she'd opened in our coastal town. It was supposed to be her big break, a curator of coastal cuisine, she'd called it, but a hurricane last season had gutted the place, chasing away customers and leaving a trail of unpaid bills. The bank was circling, threatening to seize my mother's assets if the payments weren't made. That $5,000 from my account wasn't for Thanksgiving gifts, it was a desperate patch for a late loan payment and penalties. A bandage on their sinking ship. The words landed like a punch, each one heavier than the last. My kid's future had been sacrificed to cover my sister's failure, and my mother had been the one to pull the trigger. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the cereal bowls untouched, my kids' voices fading into a distant hum. My father's voice softened, laced with guilt for not telling me sooner. He'd only found out after the fact, he said, when my mother let it slip during one of their rare arguments. He didn't want to drag me into their mess, but now he couldn't stay silent. I thanked him, my voice barely a whisper, and hung up, the weight of his words pressing against my ribs. I leaned against the counter, the cool edge biting into my palms. The betrayal wasn't just the money, it was the calculation behind it. My mother hadn't just taken from me, she'd used my kids' security to prop up my sister's reckless dreams. I'd always been the safety net, the one they turned to when their plans fell apart. I remembered the summer after my husband, Bradley, died, when I was barely holding it together, drowning in grief and single parenthood. My mother had sat me down in this same kitchen, her face all practiced concern, pushing a bank pamphlet across the table. She'd pitched the joint account as a family emergency fund, a way to protect my kids if something happened to me. No lawyers, no delays, she'd said, her voice smooth, weaponizing my fear of leaving my children vulnerable. I was raw, exhausted, and I'd agreed, depositing $3,000 of my own money. She didn't contribute a cent. It was my savings, my trust, and now it was gone. That account wasn't a safety net, it was a trap. I saw it now, clear as the Florida sun outside. My sister's restaurant wasn't the only thing that had failed. It was the whole family system, built on my willingness to give without question. I thought back to the times I'd bailed them out. 3 years ago, I'd covered a $1,500 repair bill for my mother's car after she'd rear-ended someone at a beachside stoplight. She'd called me in a panic, saying she couldn't afford it, and I'd paid, thinking it was a one-off. My sister had been there too, nodding along, promising to chip in later. She never did. Another time, I'd loaned my brother, Darren, $1,000 for a work trip he swore would lead to a big break. He paid me back half, then went silent, his neutrality a shield from the family's demands. I'd let it slide, always the one to smooth things over, to keep the peace. But peace came at a cost. My kids were growing up fast, Their needs piling up: school supplies, soccer fees, a future I was determined to secure. Every dollar I gave to my family was a dollar I couldn't give to them. My job as an IT support tech was steady, but it wasn't a gold mine. I worked long hours, troubleshooting servers and calming frantic clients, all while saving for my kids' college. Last week, my boss had pulled me aside, saying I was in line for a lead position, a raise that could finally give us breathing room. I hadn't told my family, knowing they'd find a way to make it about them. That secrecy felt like a shield now, a small rebellion against their constant pull. The anger bubbling inside me wasn't just about the $5,000. It was about what it represented: a lifetime of being seen as a resource, not a person. My mother and sister hadn't just taken money. They'd taken my trust, my effort, my kids' future. I thought of Bradley, his voice echoing from years ago, warning me they'd never see me as more than a tool. He'd been right, and I'd been too stubborn to listen. Now, standing in my kitchen, the truth was undeniable. They'd crossed a line, and I wasn't just hurt, I was furious. My kids deserved better than a mother who let her family bleed her dry. I wasn't their emergency fund anymore. I was done being their fallback, their ATM. This wasn't just a theft. It was a declaration that my boundaries meant nothing, and that realization lit a fire in me, one that wouldn't go out easily. I looked at my kids, oblivious to the storm inside me, their laughter a stark contrast to the rage pulsing through my veins. My daughter was sketching a sandcastle design, her small hands steady with purpose. My son was stacking cereal pieces into a wobbly tower, his grin wide and carefree. They were my anchor, my reason to fight. I'd spent years swallowing my pride to keep the family together, thinking it was for their sake, for some fragile sense of connection. But this betrayal showed me the truth. Keeping the peace wasn't protecting them, it was teaching them that love came with strings, that their mother's worth was tied to what she could give. That ended now. The fire in my chest wasn't chaotic, it was focused, sharp, like a blade honed by years of quiet sacrifice. I knew what had to come next. I couldn't scream or confront them head on. They'd twist it, make me the villain, as they always did. This called for something colder, something deliberate. My mother and sister thought they'd won, thought they could keep pulling from me without consequence. They were wrong. I'd spent my life fixing their messes, but this time, I'd fix something for myself and my kids, a future free of their grip. The $5,000 was gone, but it wasn't the end. It was the spark that would burn down the old rules and build new ones they couldn't break. That evening settled heavily, the quiet of my Gulf Coast home a stark contrast to the storm inside me. I sat at the small desk in my living room, the faint glow of my laptop pushing back the darkness. My kids were asleep, their soft breathing a distant anchor as I stared at the blank document on the screen. The fury from the morning's betrayal, my mother's theft of $5,000 from my kids' college fund, had cooled into something sharp and deliberate. I wasn't going to scream or call them. That would only feed their cycle of gaslighting, turning me into the unreasonable one. Instead, I'd lay down the law, my law, in a way they couldn't twist. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, steady, with purpose. This wasn't going to be a plea or an argument. It was a declaration, a wall they couldn't climb. I started typing, each word a brick in the fortress I was building for me and my kids. The letter began with the facts. Cold and unyielding, my mother had taken $5,000 from our joint account without my consent, a direct response to my refusal to hand my sister my bank login. The money, meant for my daughter and son's future, was gone to cover my sister's debts. I didn't dress it up with emotion. I let the truth stand bare. Then came the rules, non-negotiable terms for a new reality. No more financial entanglement. My accounts were off limits, permanently. No more requests for money or favors. The bank of Jocelyn was closed. My children were not to be used as leverage in their games. Any attempt would mean an immediate end to contact. Unannounced visits to our home were forbidden. They'd need to call and get my approval first. As I typed, a sense of power surged through me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For too long, I'd been the family's fixer, the one who paid, who patched, who stayed silent to keep the peace. My late husband, Bradley, had seen it clearly. "They don't deserve you," he'd said one night after I'd canceled our plans to help my mother with another crisis. His words had stung then, but now they were a beacon. I was done being their resource. My kids deserved a mother who protected their future. not one who let it be drained to prop up someone else's failures. The letter wasn't just words, it was a line in the sand, a boundary carved in stone. I listed the recipients: my mother, Brenda, my sister, Katrina, my brother, Darren, my father, Norman. Each name felt like a weight lifted, a chain broken. I read the letter once, then again, ensuring every word was precise, undeniable. It ended with a warning: these rules weren't suggestions. Break them, and I'd cut contact for 6 months. A second violation would mean a permanent end. No discussion. I signed it simply, Jocelyn. No warmth, no softness, just my name, a final stamp of authority. My heart pounded as I moved the cursor to the send button. In my mind, a countdown began, slow and deliberate, like a fuse burning down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I clicked send, and the whoosh of the email leaving my outbox was the loudest silence I'd ever heard. It was the sound of a door locking, a bridge burning. For a moment, I felt free, like I'd reclaimed a piece of myself I'd given away years ago. The weight of their expectations, their demands, their entitlement, it was gone, at least for that fleeting second. I leaned back in my chair, the tension in my shoulders easing, a rare lightness spreading through me. I'd done it. I'd taken control, set the terms. And for the first time, I wasn't the one bending. That freedom lasted only minutes. The silence of the house was shattered by my phone's first ring. My mother's name flashed on the screen, and I let it go to voicemail, my pulse quickening. Then my sister's name appeared, followed by my brother's. I ignored them all, each unanswered call a small act of defiance, but they kept coming, one after another, a relentless barrage that turned my moment of triumph into a creeping unease. The screen lit up again and again, their names stacking like accusations: Brenda, Katrina, Darren. Each call was a demand for me to back down, to apologize, to fall back in line. Even Darren, who'd always stayed on the sidelines, was now part of their coordinated assault. His neutrality, I realized, had been a mirage, a way to avoid the conflict without ever supporting me. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Answering would mean stepping back into their trap, letting them twist my words until I doubted myself. But the calls didn't stop. By the time I stood to check on my kids, my phone showed 27 missed calls. The notifications piled up, each one a jab, a reminder of their refusal to let me go quietly. I peeked into my daughter's room, her small form curled under a blanket, clutching her favorite stuffed dolphin. My son was sprawled across his bed, one leg dangling off, his toy boat tucked under his arm. Their peace steadied me, but it also sharpened my resolve. This wasn't just about me, it was about them, about breaking the cycle I'd been trapped in for years. The calls kept coming, a digital siege meant to wear me down. I remembered a moment from years ago, when I was still married, still naive enough to think I could balance the family's demands with my own life. My mother had called me late one night, her voice frantic, saying she needed help with a utility bill after a storm knocked out power to her house. I'd driven over at dawn, my kids strapped in the back seat, to sort it out. My sister had been there, sipping coffee, unbothered, while I wired the payment from my own account. "You're so good at this, Jocelyn," my mother had said, her praise a thin veneer over her reliance. Katrina hadn't even looked up from her phone. That memory burned now, a reminder of how they'd always taken without giving back. Another time, I'd spent a weekend rebuilding my mother's crashed computer, my kids playing in her backyard while I worked. She'd gone on about how Katrina was so busy with her restaurant dreams, too important to deal with tech stuff. I'd nodded, swallowing my frustration, thinking that's what family did. But family wasn't supposed to drain you dry. Bradley had tried to tell me, his voice gentle but firm, after I'd skipped a rare day off to drive my brother to a job interview across the state. "They use you, Jocelyn," he'd said, his hand squeezing mine. "You're worth more than that." I hadn't listened then, but now his words were a lifeline. The phone buzzed again, pulling me back. I glanced at it, another call from Brenda, then Katrina, then Darren again. I imagined them huddled together, plotting their next move, convinced they could bully me into submission. They didn't know the woman they were dealing with now, the old Jocelyn, the one who'd paid their bills, fixed their messes, and stayed silent, was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who'd written that letter not out of anger, but out of necessity. It wasn't just about the money they'd taken, it was about the years they'd taken, the trust they'd broken, the future they'd tried to steal from my kids. I sat back down, the laptop still open, the sent email staring back at me. The freedom I'd felt when I clicked send was fading, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Had they read it? Were they laughing it off, dismissing me as dramatic, or were they planning something worse? A way to force their way back into my life. The phone's relentless buzzing was a warning they weren't going to let this go. I thought of my kids, sleeping soundly, unaware of the war I'd just declared. I'd spent years teaching them to stand up to bullies, to protect their space, their hearts. Now I had to do the same, not just for me, but for them. The calls didn't stop. By midnight, the screen showed 43 missed calls, a testament to their desperation. I didn't need to listen to the voicemails to know what they'd say: accusations, guilt trips, demands for me to explain myself. My mother would call it a misunderstanding. My sister would play the victim. My brother would try to mediate, all while siding with them. I'd seen the script before, played it out too many times, but this time, I wasn't following their lines. I'd written my own, and I wasn't backing down. What do you think? Would a letter like that work for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to see how this plays out. Morning came too soon, the quiet of my Gulf Coast home shattered by a sharp knock at the door. I was in the kitchen, pouring orange juice for my kids, their chatter about a beach outing still filling the air. The sound hit like a warning, insistent and heavy, not the casual rap of a neighbor. My pulse quickened as I crossed the living room, pausing at the peephole. There they were: my mother, Brenda, my sister, Katrina, and my brother. Darren standing on my doorstep like a tribunal ready to pass judgment. Brenda's face was a mask of fury, her posture rigid. Katrina's eyes glinted with calculated tears. Darren stood slightly back, his expression uneasy but complicit. This wasn't a visit, it was an ambush. I opened the door just enough to block the entry, my body a barrier between them and my kids' world. Brenda's voice cut through first, demanding to be let in, accusing me of tearing the family apart with my letter. Katrina chimed in, her voice breaking with practiced drama, claiming I was selfish, leaving her kids without a proper Thanksgiving. Darren tried a softer approach, urging me to calm down and talk it out like family should. His words sounded reasonable, but his presence alongside them betrayed his allegiance. I felt the weight of their collective pressure, their expectation that I'd buckle as always. But the woman they'd known, the one who'd paid their bills, fixed their messes, was gone. I stood firm, my hand tight on the doorknob. My letter had laid out the rules, I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. No more financial demands, no unannounced visits, no using my kids as leverage. Brenda scoffed, waving a printed copy of my email like evidence of a crime, calling it dramatic nonsense. Katrina stepped closer, her tears vanishing, replaced by a sharp edge as she insisted we needed to fix this now. Darren leaned in, his tone patronizing, saying I was overreacting, that family didn't cut each other off over money. His attempt at mediation rang hollow, his words a thin mask for their shared goal to pull me back into their control. I didn't waver. I repeated the rules from my letter, each one a shield. My accounts were closed to them. My home was my sanctuary, my kids were off limits. Katrina lunged forward, wedging her foot in the door, her voice rising as she accused me of ruining everything, of abandoning her family. I pushed back, the door firm against her effort, my resolve unshaken. Brenda shouted, her words a mix of anger and disbelief, calling me ungrateful after all she'd done. Darren's face hardened, his pretense of neutrality gone, urging me to show respect for our mother. Respect, he said, as if my years of giving hadn't been enough. The confrontation wasn't new, it was the culmination of years of their entitlement. I remembered a time, not long after Bradley's death, when Brenda had shown up unannounced, demanding I host a family dinner to keep us together. I'd been grieving, barely managing as a single mom, but I'd cooked, cleaned, and paid for it all while Katrina complained about the menu and Darren sat silently, offering nothing. Another time, Katrina had barged in, asking for a loan to cover a business expense, her eyes avoiding mine as I transferred the money, depleting my savings. Darren had called later, saying I was the only one who could handle her, as if that was my job. My late husband had warned me, his voice quiet but firm, that they'd never see me as more than a means to an end. You're not their family, Jocelyn, he'd said. You're their solution. Now, standing in my doorway, I saw it clearly. They weren't here to talk. They were here to enforce the old rules, to remind me of my place. But I wasn't that person anymore. I pushed the door harder, Katrina's foot slipping back with a yelp. Brenda's shouts grew louder, accusing me of betraying the family, of shaming them. Katrina's voice cracked, her fake tears gone, replaced by raw anger as she called me heartless. Darren's final plea, asking me to think of the kids, was the last straw, using my own children against me, just as my letter had forbidden. I closed the door, the lock clicking with a finality that echoed in my bones. Their voices raged outside, a muffled storm of accusations and demands. Brenda pounded on the door, her shouts sharp and desperate. Katrina's cries turned shrill, blaming me for her problems. Darren's low voice muttered about disrespect, about how I'd regret this. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering but my hands steady. The noise outside was loud, but it was outside. My kids were safe in their rooms, their laughter from earlier still lingering in my mind. My daughter's sketches of sandcastles, my son's toy boat, they were my world, and I'd protect it. The pounding slowed, then stopped. I peeked through the peephole, watching them argue among themselves on my small porch. Brenda gestured wildly. Katrina clutched her bag like a shield, and Darren shook his head, his face a mix of frustration and defeat. They trudged back to their car, a defeated trio, their unity crumbling under the weight of their failed mission. I stood there, my back against the door, feeling a strange mix of triumph and exhaustion. I'd held the line, but I knew this wasn't the end. They'd come back, in one form or another, because that's what they did, push until you broke. But I wasn't breaking, not anymore. I thought of the years I'd spent trying to keep them together, to be the good daughter, the reliable sister. I'd driven hours to fix their problems, paid for their mistakes, and silenced my own needs. I remembered a night, years ago, when I'd stayed up late helping Brenda sort through her taxes after she'd ignored them for months. My kids were asleep, and I was exhausted from work. But I'd done it, thinking it was my duty. Katrina had called the next day, asking for gas money, and I'd sent it without question. Darren had always stayed out of it, offering vague apologies but never action. Bradley had seen it all, his quiet disappointment a mirror I couldn't face. They don't value you, he'd said, his hand on mine. Now, I understood. The door stayed locked, a physical boundary to match the one I'd set in my letter. My kids were still in their rooms, safe from the chaos outside. I walked to my daughter's doorway, watching her sleep, her small chest rising and falling. My son was curled up, his toy boat clutched tight. They were why I'd stood firm, why I'd pushed that door shut. I'd spent years teaching them to stand up for themselves, to say no to bullies. Now I was doing the same, not just for me, but for them. The shouts outside had faded, but the echo of their entitlement lingered, a reminder of the fight I'd chosen. I wasn't just closing a door, I was building a wall, one they couldn't breach. The afternoon passed in silence, but the quiet was a fragile shield. After the chaos at my doorstep, I needed to act, to protect my kids and myself from the family's relentless grip. I sat on the couch in our Gulf Coast home, the weight of the morning's confrontation still pressing against my chest. My kids were at a neighbor's, their laughter safely out of reach of the storm I'd just faced. I knew Brenda, Katrina, and Darren wouldn't stop, they'd come back. Their entitlement a tide that never receded. I couldn't let my home, my sanctuary, remain a target. I needed to disappear, to build a fortress they couldn't find. My hand reached for my phone, and I dialed the one person I could trust, my friend, Clifton. Clifton had been my rock since high school, the only one who never asked for anything but friendship. I told him everything, the stolen $5,000, the threatening texts, the doorstep ambush. His voice was steady, no hesitation. "Let's get you out," he said, his words a lifeline. We didn't waste time. By dusk, he was at my house, his truck parked discreetly by the back path near the bay. We moved in whispers, like operatives in a covert mission, carrying boxes through the narrow trail lined with mangroves. The humid Florida air clung to my skin as we hauled furniture, my couch, the kids' beds, their dressers muffling every sound with towels to avoid drawing attention. Each step felt like a rebellion, a reclaiming of my life. We didn't use a moving van, it would have been too loud, too obvious. Instead, We ferried everything across the short distance to a new house, just a block away, its porch overlooking the same white sand beach. I'd spotted it days earlier, when a neighbor mentioned a vacant rental nearby. The landlord, a kind woman I'd met at a local seafood joint, had agreed to a quick lease. By midnight, we'd moved the essentials: clothes, toys, my daughter's stuffed dolphin, my son's toy boat, the framed photo of Bradley I kept by my bed. The new house was a mess of boxes, but it was ours, a hidden refuge my family didn't know existed. Before we finished, I called a locksmith. A gruff man named Joe arrived, his toolbox clanking softly in the night. He swapped the locks on the new house first, handing me keys that felt like a promise of safety. Then, in a move that felt both petty and necessary, I had him change the locks on the old house too, leaving no trace. "Huh," he said, raising an eyebrow but not questioning further. I slipped him an extra $50, calling it a precaution. I didn't want Brenda or Katrina trying to sweet-talk the landlord for a key, claiming I'd left something behind. I left the old keys on the empty counter of my former home, a final severance from the life I'd outgrown. By dawn, I stood in the new living room, the scent of salt air drifting through an open window. The kids were still at the neighbors, giving me time to unpack the basics. I glanced out the window, my view now angled toward the old house across the bay. Around noon, I saw them, Brenda and Katrina, marching up to my old doorstep, their faces tight with determination. Brenda knocked, sharp and demanding, calling my name. Katrina joined in, her voice rising in frustration as she pounded the door. They tried the knob, rattling it uselessly, their confusion palpable. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, watching from my new sanctuary. They didn't know I was gone, didn't know I'd slipped out of their reach. My phone buzzed relentlessly, a storm of notifications. Brenda's name flashed, then Katrina's, then Darren's. He hadn't come to the house, but his calls were part of their onslaught, a digital echo of their anger. I didn't answer. Each buzz felt like a jab. But I was untouchable now. I opened my phone, my fingers steady as I blocked their numbers one by one. Brenda, Katrina, Darren. The silence that followed was profound. A weight lifted. I'd spent years tethered to their demands, their crises, their chaos. I remembered a time, not long after Bradley's death, when I'd driven to Katrina's restaurant to help her sort inventory after a storm. I'd spent hours there, my kids in tow, while she complained about her staff. Brenda had called it a family effort, but I'd paid for the gas, the time, the emotional toll. Another memory surfaced, sharper now. I'd once spent a weekend fixing Brenda's flooded basement, hauling out soaked boxes while my kids played nearby. She thanked me with a pat on the arm, saying I was the reliable one, the one who always came through. Darren had called later, asking if I could spot him for a new phone, promising to pay me back. I'd sent the money, knowing I'd never see it again. Bradley had warned me, his voice heavy with concern, that they'd keep taking until I had nothing left. "You're not their bank, Jocelyn," he'd said, his eyes searching mine. I hadn't listened then, but now his words were my guide. Standing in my new home, I felt a clarity I hadn't known before. This wasn't just a move, it was an escape, a deliberate severing of the ties that had drained me for years. I thought of my kids, their small faces bright with trust, unaware of the battle I'd fought to keep them safe. My daughter's sketches, my son's toy boat. They were symbols of the life I was building, one free of my family's reach. The old house, just across the bay, was empty now, a shell of the past I'd left behind. Brenda and Katrina stood there a few minutes longer, their shouts fading as they realized no one was coming. They trudged back to their car, defeated, their figures small against the vastness of the beach. My phone stayed quiet after I blocked their numbers, the silence a victory. I walked through the new house, touching the boxes, the furniture, the keys in my pocket. Each item was a piece of a new beginning, a life where my kids and I could breathe. I'd spent years being the fixer, the one who paid, who stayed silent, but that Jocelyn was gone. I'd moved not just my belongings, but my entire world, to a place where their demands couldn't follow. The fight wasn't over, they'd try again, in some new way, because that's what they did. But I was ready now. My boundaries locked tight, my kids safe behind them. Thanksgiving arrived quietly, a soft dawn breaking over our new Gulf Coast home, for the first time in years. I woke without the knot of dread that usually came with family holidays. No bracing for sharp comments. No preparing for the chaos my mother, Brenda, or my sister, Katrina, would inevitably stir. It was just me and my kids, my 8-year-old daughter and 5-year-old son, ready to make the day our own. We headed to the white sand beach near our house, the air crisp with salt and promise. My daughter clutched a bucket for shells, her eyes bright with excitement, while my son ran ahead, his small feet kicking up sand. "Can we eat shrimp today, Mom?" he asked, his voice full of hope. I nodded, smiling, feeling lighter than I had in years. We set up a picnic by the water, a blanket spread under a palm tree, the waves a gentle hum in the background. I'd ordered takeout from a local seafood shack: shrimp, crab legs, hush puppies, nothing fancy, just warm and ours. We ate with our hands, laughing as sauce dripped down our chins, the kids piling shells into wobbly towers. There was no pressure to perform, no sidelong glances from relatives comparing my kids to others. My daughter showed me a perfect conch shell, her grin wide. My son tried to surf on a piece of driftwood, tumbling into the sand with a giggle. Their joy was pure, untainted by the family drama I'd left behind. This was what a holiday could be: simple, free, ours. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange, we walked along the shore, collecting more shells and chasing seagulls. I watched my kids, their small figures silhouetted against the waves, and felt a gratitude so deep it ached. This moment, this peace, was what I'd fought for. The betrayal: Brenda taking $5,000 from my kids' college fund, Katrina's demands. The doorstep ambush had forced me to see the truth. I'd spent years thinking my kids needed a big family, even a flawed one, to feel whole, but I was wrong. They needed me, safe and strong, not a mother drained by endless demands. My late husband, Bradley, had seen it years ago. "They take too much, Jocelyn," he'd said, his voice heavy after I'd bailed out Katrina yet again. Now, I understood. Months later, the consequences of my stand unfolded. I heard through a distant cousin that Katrina's world had collapsed. The bank had seized her house. The final blow after her seafood restaurant crumbled under unpaid loans. The $50,000 debt my mother had co-signed for her was a noose, and Katrina's missed payments had tightened it. Her husband, Brian, walked out, filing for divorce when the financial strain became too much. Brenda faced her own reckoning. Her assets, tied to that loan, were drained, leaving her with a foreclosed condo and a mountain of legal fees. Darren, my brother, sent a text months after I'd blocked him, a half-hearted apology laced with excuses. I didn't respond. I blocked him again, his words a faint echo of a guilt trip I no longer felt. I'd built a new life, one where my kids and I were the center. My father, Norman, started calling more often. "Proud of you," he said one Sunday, his voice warm over the phone as we talked about the kids' school projects and the rising cost of shrimp. We didn't mention Brenda or Katrina. It was an unspoken boundary, a wound we left untouched. Our conversations grew into weekly dinners, him driving down from his place up the coast to join us. Clifton, my friend, became a fixture too, showing up with tools to fix a squeaky door or to build sandcastles with my kids. They called him Uncle Clifton now, his laughter a steady presence in our small world. My job as an IT support tech kept us grounded. The promotion I'd been eyeing came through a lead role with a raise that let me take the kids for ice cream without checking my balance first. Each paycheck I saved went straight to their college fund, a quiet act of defiance against the theft that had sparked this change. I thought back to the years I'd spent trying to hold the family together. I'd paid for Brenda's groceries when her account ran dry, driven Katrina to meetings when her car broke down, even covered Darren's rent once when he was between jobs. Each time, I'd told myself it was what family did. But Bradley's voice lingered, clear and steady. "You're not their bank, Jocelyn." I'd ignored him then, but now I lived by it. The new house felt like a sanctuary, its walls free of the weight of my family's demands. I'd hung a small frame in the hallway, not of a check like some might, but of a shell my daughter had found that Thanksgiving Day. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder of what I'd gained by letting go. The old house, just a block away, stood empty, a ghost of the life I'd escaped. I'd spent years believing family was a debt I owed, a ledger I had to balance with my time, my money, my heart. I'd thought love meant giving until I broke, that my kids needed aunts, uncles, and grandparents. No matter how toxic, I was wrong. Family wasn't a chain you wore out of duty. It was a choice. A circle you built with people who saw you, who valued you. Brenda, Katrina, and Darren had treated me like an ATM, drawing from my life without ever depositing respect. They'd called my boundaries selfish, my stand cruel, but from where I stood, it was freedom. Setting those limits wasn't dramatic, it was survival. It was the first full breath I'd taken after years of holding it in. My kids didn't need a sprawling family tree. They needed me, whole and present, not a shadow worn thin by obligation. Now, as I watched my daughter sketch waves in her notebook and my son stack blocks into a lighthouse, I saw the truth. Family was the laughter we shared on that beach, the quiet dinners with Norman, the moments Clifton spent teaching my kids to skip stones. It was the life we were building, brick by brick, free from the weight of those who'd taken too much. The lesson wasn't easy, but it was clear. Protect your boundaries. Guard your peace. Choose who gets to share your world. My kids and I were enough, and that was everything.